I've worked at McDonald's for a few years now, and like most employees, I've gotten used to the usual annoyances: rude customers, long shifts, and the smell of grease that clings to you even after you've showered. But nothing could have prepared me for what happened one quiet Wednesday evening. It was a slow night, with only a handful of customers coming in. The place was nearly empty, which meant I had plenty of time to clean up and prepare for closing. The only other person on shift with me was Sarah, a cheerful girl who had started a few months ago. We chatted as we worked, trying to pass the time. Around 10 p.m., just as we were about to start our closing routine, a man walked in. At first, he seemed normal enough, if not a bit out of place. He was dressed in a full clown costume, complete with a red nose and oversized shoes. It was strange, but not unheard of. People do weird things sometimes. "Welcome to McDonald's," Sarah said, her voice tinged with amusement. "What can I get for you?" The clown didn't respond. He just stood there, staring at us with a fixed, unnerving grin. His makeup was smudged, giving him a disheveled, almost sinister appearance. "Sir, can I take your order?" Sarah repeated, a hint of unease creeping into her voice. The clown finally moved, slowly reaching into his pocket. For a moment, I thought he might pull out some money or a wallet, but instead, he produced a small, red balloon. He held it out to Sarah, his grin widening. "Okay, that's enough," I said, stepping forward. "If you're not going to order, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." The clown turned his gaze to me, his eyes dark and hollow. Without a word, he tied the balloon to the counter and backed away, his movements slow and deliberate. The bell above the door jingled as he left, and a sense of unease settled over the restaurant. "That was weird," Sarah said, staring at the balloon. "Yeah, no kidding," I replied, my eyes still on the door. "Let's just get through the rest of the night." We tried to shrug it off and continue with our closing routine, but the encounter had left us both on edge. The restaurant felt different, the usual hum of the machines, and the distant sound of traffic now seemed eerie and foreboding. As we were finishing up, the lights suddenly flickered and went out. The entire restaurant was plunged into darkness, and I heard Sarah gasp. "Stay calm," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. "It's probably just a power outage." I pulled out my phone and turned on the flashlight, the narrow beam cutting through the darkness. "Let's find the breaker box," I said, heading towards the back of the restaurant. Sarah followed closely behind, her breathing quick and shallow. We reached the storage room where the breaker box was located and found the door slightly ajar. I pushed it open, the hinges creaking loudly in the silence. As I shone the light inside, my heart skipped a beat. The room was filled with red balloons, identical to the one the clown had left on the counter. They covered the floor, the walls, even the ceiling. It was like stepping into a twisted carnival. "What the hell?" Sarah whispered, her voice trembling. I took a step forward, the balloons crunching underfoot. My hand shook as I reached for the breaker box, flipping the switches one by one. The lights flickered back on, and we were both momentarily blinded by the sudden brightness. When my vision cleared, I saw something that made my blood run cold. Written on the walls, in what looked like smeared red paint, were the words, "I'm always watching." "That's it," I said, my voice shaking. "We're getting out of here." We hurried back to the front of the restaurant, the red balloons seeming to follow us, their presence oppressive and menacing. As we reached the counter, we saw that the door was locked from the outside. "How is that possible?" Sarah cried, her voice rising in panic. I didn't have an answer. All I knew was that we were trapped, and that the clown was somewhere out there, watching us. I pulled out my phone to call for help, but there was no signal. It was as if we were completely cut off from the outside world. "Let's try the back door," I said, my mind racing. "Maybe we can find another way out." We made our way to the back of the restaurant, our footsteps echoing in the empty space. The kitchen was dark, the overhead lights flickering sporadically. As we approached the back door, I noticed something that made my stomach churn. Standing just outside the door, visible through the small window, was the clown. He stood perfectly still, his grin wide and unblinking. In his hand he held another red balloon. Sarah screamed, and I grabbed her arm, pulling her away from the door. "We need to find another way out," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. We ran to the storage room, hoping to find a window or another exit. The red balloons seemed to multiply, filling every corner of the room. We pushed through them, the smell of latex strong and suffocating. In the far corner of the storage room, we found a small window. It was high up, but with some effort, we managed to pry it open. I helped Sarah climb through first, her feet slipping on the stacks of boxes. Just as I was about to climb out myself, I heard a noise behind me. I turned to see the clown standing in the doorway, his eyes fixed on me. He raised his hand, the red balloon bobbing gently. I scrambled through the window, my heart pounding in my chest. Sarah and I ran as fast as we could, not stopping until we were several blocks away from the restaurant. We called the police, but by the time they arrived, the clown was gone, and the balloons had disappeared. The restaurant closed for a few days after that, the management citing a power outage as the reason. But Sarah and I knew the truth. We had seen something that night, something that couldn't be explained. I never went back to that McDonald's, and Sarah quit soon after. The memory of that clown, his sinister grin, and the red balloons haunted me, a constant reminder that some nightmares are all too real. Working the night shift at McDonald's wasn't exactly my dream job, but it paid the bills while I worked on my degree. Most nights were uneventful, a handful of customers and plenty of time to study in between orders. That was until one particular Friday night, a night that would haunt me forever. I clocked in at 11 p.m., greeted by the usual hum of the fryers and the faint smell of grease that had permeated my clothes since I started working here. Mark, the manager, was in the back doing inventory. The rest of the crew was already there, Lisa on the grill, Kevin on the register, and Jenny prepping in the kitchen. Things started off normal enough. The usual late-night crowd trickled in, college students needing a midnight snack, truckers stopping by for a quick meal, and the occasional night owl just wandering in for a cup of coffee. By 1 a.m., things had quieted down. Kevin and I were chatting at the counter, trying to stave off boredom. That's when she walked in. She looked out of place from the moment she stepped through the door. Her clothes were outdated, like something out of the 80s, and her hair was styled in a way I hadn't seen in decades. But it was her eyes that caught me. They were wide and unblinking, staring straight ahead as if she was in a trance. "Welcome to McDonald's. How can I help you?" Kevin asked, trying to sound cheerful despite the eerie vibe she gave off. She didn't respond. Instead, she slowly walked up to the counter, her eyes never leaving Kevin's face. The air grew cold, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. "Ma'am, can I take your order?" Kevin repeated, his voice trembling slightly. She finally spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. "I'm looking for my son. Have you seen him?" Kevin and I exchanged puzzled glances. "I'm sorry, Mom," Kevin said. "We haven't seen any children tonight." Her expression didn't change. "He loves McDonald's. I thought he might be here." "I'm really sorry," I said, trying to sound empathetic. "But we haven't seen anyone matching that description. Maybe you should try the police." She ignored my suggestion, her eyes finally leaving Kevin's face to scan the empty dining area. "He's here," she whispered, more to herself than to us. "I know he's here." Without another word, she turned and walked out, the bell above the door jingling softly as she left. Kevin and I stood there in stunned silence. That was weird, he finally said, shaking his head. You think she's okay? Look, I don't know, I replied, still feeling the chill from her presence. But I hope she finds her son. We tried to shake it off and get back to work, but the strange encounter left us both uneasy. The rest of the night passed slowly, with neither of us able to shake the feeling that something was off. Around 3 a.m. Lisa came up front to grab a drink. You guys look like you've seen a ghost, she said, laughing. We might have, Kevin muttered, telling her about the strange woman. Lisa shrugged it off, but I could tell she was a little spooked too. The rest of the shift passed without incident, and by 7 a.m. I was more than ready to clock out and head home. As I was leaving, Mark called me into his office. Hey, I need you to take a look at something, he said, his face unusually serious. I followed him to the security room, where he pulled up the footage from the night before. We watched as the woman walked in, her eerie presence captured on the grainy screen. But then something strange happened. As she turned to leave, she seemed to fade away, disappearing before she reached the door. Did you see that, I asked, my voice barely a whisper. Mark nodded, his face pale. I don't know what to make of it, but she's not the first. What do you mean, I asked, dread pooling in my stomach. He pulled out a stack of old reports, dating back decades. Each one detailed sightings of a woman matching her description, always looking for her son, always fading away before reaching the door. Some say it's a ghost, Mark said, his voice shaking. A mother who lost her child in a tragic accident, doomed to search for him for eternity. I left the office, the weight of the night pressing heavily on my shoulders. I never saw the woman again, but every time I worked the night shift, I couldn't shake the feeling that she was out there, still searching, still hoping to find her lost son. When I first started working at McDonald's, I didn't think much about the basement. It was just a place to store extra supplies and old equipment, a part of the restaurant that employees rarely needed to visit. But that all changed one night during a particularly busy shift. It was a Saturday night, and the restaurant was packed. The line stretched out the door, and we were scrambling to keep up with the orders. I was working the grill, flipping burgers as fast as I could, when Mark, the manager, called me over. We're running low on cups, he said, frustration evident in his voice. Can you run down to the basement and grab a few cases? I nodded, wiping the sweat from my forehead with the back of my hand. The basement was the last place I wanted to go, especially on a night like this, but I didn't have much choice. I grabbed a flashlight from the counter and headed towards the back of the restaurant. The basement door was old and creaky, and it took some effort to pry it open. A musty smell hit me as soon as I stepped inside, and I felt a shiver run down my spine. The basement was dark, the only light coming from the narrow beam of my flashlight. I made my way down the rickety stairs, the wood groaning under my weight. The basement was cluttered with boxes and old equipment, the remnants of years gone by. I navigated through the mess, searching for the cases of cups Mark had mentioned. The deeper I went, the colder it seemed to get, until I could see my breath in the air. I finally found the cups in a corner, stacked haphazardly on top of each other. I grabbed the case and turned to leave, but something caught my eye. In the far corner of the basement, half hidden behind a stack of old chairs, was a door I had never noticed before. Curiosity got the better of me, and I made my way over to the door. It was old and weathered, the paint peeling off in large chunks. I reached out and turned the handle, surprised to find it unlocked. The door creaked open, revealing a narrow passageway that seemed to lead deeper underground. Every instinct told me to turn back, but something compelled me to move forward. I squeezed through the door and into the passageway, the walls closing in around me. The air was damp and heavy, and the smell of decay grew stronger with each step. After what felt like an eternity, the passageway opened up into a small room. The walls were lined with old newspaper clippings and photographs, yellowed with age. In the center of the room was a small table, and on it sat a single, flickering candle. I approached the table, my heart pounding in my chest. The candle cast eerie shadows on the walls, making the room feel alive. I picked up one of the photographs, my hands trembling. It was a picture of a family, taken in front of a McDonald's. The date on the back read 1982. I set the photo down and picked up one of the newspaper clippings. The headline sent a chill down my spine. Family disappears. Without a trace, the article detailed the mysterious disappearance of a family of 4, last seen at the very McDonald's where I now stood. A sense of dread washed over me as I realized the significance of the room. It was a shrine, a memorial to the lost family. But who had built it? And why was it hidden away in the basement? I backed out of the room, the candle flickering wildly as if reacting to my presence. I turned and hurried back down the passageway, my flashlight beam bouncing off the walls. I reached the basement stairs and practically ran up them, the heavy door slamming shut behind me. I burst into the restaurant, the bright lights and noise a stark contrast to the dark, silent basement. Mark looked up from the counter, a concerned expression on his face. "Did you get the cups?" he asked. I handed him the case, my hand still shaking. "Mark, there's something in the basement," I said, my voice barely above a whisper. He frowned, setting the cups down. "What are you talking about?" I told him about the door, the passageway, the room with the photographs and clippings. His face grew pale as I spoke, his eyes wide with fear. "I thought it was just a rumor," he muttered, more to himself than to me. "What rumor?" I demanded, my fear turning to anger. "What do you know about this?" He took a deep breath, his hands trembling. "Years ago, a family disappeared from this town. They were last seen at this McDonald's. Some say the father went mad, that he built that room in the basement to keep his family close, but no one ever found them." I felt a chill run down my spine. "So what do we do?" Mark shook his head, his expression grim. "There's nothing we can do. That basement is a tomb, a reminder of a tragedy that no one can explain. We just have to live with it." I never went back to the basement after that night. The memory of that hidden room, the photographs and the candle haunted me, a constant reminder of the darkness that lurked beneath the surface of everyday life. And every time I walked past the basement door, I couldn't help but feel that the lost family was still down there, waiting to be found.